The autumn mist clung to the Blue Ridge Mountains like a shroud over forgotten secrets. Deep within the Shenandoah wilderness, where cell towers couldn't reach and GPS signals died among the ancient oaks, a woman sat motionless beside a dying campfire, her back straight against a fallen log, eyes scanning the tree line with the kind of awareness that came from years of staying alive in places where mistakes meant death. To anyone who might stumble across her small camp, Sophia Reeves looked like just another lost hiker, a woman in her early 40s wearing worn hiking boots, faded cargo pants, and a fleece jacket that had seen better days. But the way she held herself, the deliberate spacing of her gear, and the fact that she'd been missing for 6 days without showing any signs of panic, suggested something far more complex than a simple case of someone who'd wandered off the trail. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The search and rescue teams had been combing these mountains for nearly a week now, following false leads and dead-end trails that seemed to evaporate into the Virginia wilderness like morning dew. What they didn't know was that Sophia wasn't lost at all. She was hiding. And she was very, very good at it. Cameron Mitchell had been working search and rescue in the Blue Ridge Mountains for 12 years, long enough to develop an instinct for reading the wilderness and the people who got swallowed by it. He'd seen everything. Day hikers who'd underestimated a simple trail and ended up spending 3 nights eating berries. Experienced backpackers who'd taken a wrong turn in fog and wandered 20 miles off course. And city folks who'd thought they could tackle the Appalachian Trail without proper preparation and ended up hypothermic and delirious. But Sophia Reeves was different. Something about her case had been bothering him since the first day her husband reported her missing. According to the initial report, Sophia had left their cabin in Luray on a Tuesday morning, telling her husband, David, she was going for a day hike on the Old Rag Mountain Trail. She'd taken a small day pack, water, some snacks, and her phone. When she didn't return by evening, David had called the Park Service. Standard procedure had kicked in immediately. Grid searches, helicopter flyovers, K-9 units, volunteers from 3 counties. They'd found her car at the Old Rag parking area, just as expected. But that's where the logical trail ended. What struck Cameron as odd was how clean the disappearance was. No abandoned gear scattered by animals, no signs of injury. No evidence of someone who'd panicked and made poor decisions. The search dogs had picked up her scent for about 2 miles along the official trail, then lost it completely near Saddle Spring, not gradually, not mixed with other scents, but just gone, as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. In 12 years of rescue work, Cameron had never seen someone's trail just stop like that, unless they'd been picked up by a vehicle, and there were no roads within miles of that location. The other thing that nagged at him was David Reeves himself. The man seemed genuinely worried about his wife, but there was something rehearsed about his answers, something that felt like he was sticking to a script. When Cameron had asked about Sophia's hiking experience, David had said she was reasonably experienced and left it at that. When pressed for details about her background, her work, her habits, David had become vague, mentioning something about her being between jobs and having some military experience, but not elaborating. Most spouses of missing hikers couldn't stop talking, sharing every detail that might help find their loved one. David Reeves seemed to be rationing information. By day 4, the search had expanded to include thermal imaging drones and specialized tracking teams from the state police. The media had picked up the story. Local woman missing in Shenandoah wilderness. Her photo was circulated. A pleasant-looking woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, friendly eyes, the kind of face that looked equally at home in a corporate boardroom or on a hiking trail. Nothing about the image suggested someone with specialized training, someone who might have reasons for wanting to disappear, but Cameron's instincts kept telling him something was off. On the morning of day 5, he'd made a decision to break from the official search grid and follow his own theory. If Sophia Reeves had military experience, even basic training, she might have survival skills that went beyond what her husband had shared. And if she had survival skills, she might not be lost at all. She might be avoiding being found. Cameron had started his search at dawn, working his way through terrain that the official teams had marked as unlikely, areas too remote or too difficult for a casual day hiker to reach. He'd been moving through a section of old-growth forest about 8 miles from where Sophia's trail had gone cold, following game paths and ridgelines that didn't appear on any recreational maps. The morning mist was just beginning to lift when he caught the first whiff of wood smoke. It was faint, almost imperceptible, the kind of scent that could have been a distant campfire or even someone's fireplace miles away carried on the wind. But Cameron's nose had been trained by years in the wilderness, and he knew this smoke was close. More importantly, it was coming from an area where no camping was permitted, where no trails led, where no casual hiker would ever think to venture. He'd followed the scent for nearly an hour, moving carefully through dense undergrowth and over fallen logs until he'd spotted the thin wisp of smoke rising from a small clearing, hidden in a natural bowl between 2 ridges. Cameron had approached slowly, following his training for potentially dangerous situations. People who camped illegally in remote areas weren't always friendly to authority figures, and he'd learned to be cautious. But as he'd crept closer, staying downwind and using the trees for cover, what he'd seen had stopped him cold. The campsite was immaculate. Not just clean, but organized with military precision. A small, nearly smokeless fire contained within a perfect circle of stones, gear arranged in precise lines and angles. A shelter built not from a tent, but from branches and natural materials woven together so expertly that it was almost invisible from more than 20 feet away. And sitting beside the fire, facing the direction he was approaching from, even though he'd made no sound, was Sophia Reeves. She didn't look lost. She didn't look panicked or relieved to see a potential rescuer. She looked calm, alert, and completely in control. Her clothes were dirty, but not torn. Her face was lean but not gaunt. She had the appearance of someone who had been living comfortably in the wilderness, not surviving it. And when their eyes met across the clearing, Cameron had felt a chill run down his spine. Because in that moment, he realized that Sophia Reeves hadn't just been found. She had allowed herself to be found. "You must be with the search team," she said quietly, her voice carrying easily across the clearing despite being barely above a whisper. There was no surprise in her tone, no relief, no emotion at all. Just a statement of fact delivered with the kind of calm that came from someone who had seen much worse things than being lost in the woods. Cameron had stepped into the clearing, his radio in his hand but not yet keyed. Something told him to wait, to listen, to understand what he was really looking at before he called in his discovery. "Ma'am, I'm Cameron Mitchell with Search and Rescue. We've been looking for you for 6 days. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Sophia had studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes taking in everything about him, his gear, his posture, the way he held his radio. It was the kind of assessment that went far beyond casual observation. It was tactical evaluation, the kind of visual sweep that cataloged threats and advantages and escape routes in a matter of seconds. "I'm fine," she'd said finally, "but I imagine you have questions." And in that moment, Cameron had realized that whatever story he'd been told about Sophia Reeves being a lost hiker was about to fall apart completely. Cameron didn't reach for his radio. Something in Sophia's posture, in the way she sat with her hands visible but relaxed, told him that rushing to call in her location might not be the smart move. He'd been doing search and rescue long enough to recognize when a situation was more complex than it appeared. And this woman sitting in a perfectly organized wilderness camp after 6 days of evading professional search teams was definitely more complex than it appeared. "Questions," he repeated, settling his pack on the ground but keeping his distance. Well, let's start with the obvious one. Your husband reported you missing 6 days ago. Said you went for a day hike and never came back. But this, he gestured. At the expertly constructed shelter, the organized gear, the smokeless fire. This doesn't look like someone who got turned around on a trail. Sophia's expression didn't change, but Cameron caught the slightest tightening around her eyes. David's a good man, she said carefully. He worries when I'm gone longer than expected. Longer than expected for a day hike maybe, but this setup, this took days to build. And you're what, 8 miles from where your trail went cold? Through terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers. Cameron kept his voice level, non-threatening, but his mind was racing. Ma'am, I've been doing this for 12 years. I've never seen someone disappear so completely from a search grid, then turn up living this comfortably in the middle of nowhere. Sophia stood slowly, her movements fluid and controlled. Cameron noted that she rose without using her hands for support, without the stiffness that would be expected from someone who'd been sleeping rough for nearly a week. She moved like an athlete, like someone whose body was a precisely maintained tool. You're observant, she said, walking over to where a metal cup sat cooling beside the fire. Coffee? I know it's not regulation for search and rescue, but you've been hiking for hours to get here. The offer caught Cameron off guard. Most people they found in the wilderness were either panicked and grateful for rescue, or defensive about whatever had led them to need rescuing in the first place. Sophia Reeves was offering him coffee like they were meeting for a casual conversation in her living room. How did you know I'd been hiking for hours? He asked, your gait when you approached. Slight favor to the left foot, which means you've been on uneven terrain for a while. Your breathing pattern when you stopped. The fact that you approached from the northwest, which is the most difficult route to this location, but also the one that would avoid the official search grids. Sophia poured coffee from a small, efficient camping setup that looked like it had been designed for extended field use. You're not following the standard search pattern. You're following your instincts. Cameron accepted the cup, noting that the coffee was good, better than camp coffee had any right to be. You seem to know a lot about search patterns. I know a lot about a lot of things. Sophia sat back down, cradling her own cup. The question is, what are you going to do with what you've found here? Well, the obvious answer is that I'm going to radio in your location and get you back to your family. There are about 50 people looking for you right now, including your husband, who's been going out of his mind with worry. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. When she looked up, Cameron saw something in her eyes that made him reconsider everything about the situation. It wasn't fear, exactly, but it was close. It was the look of someone who was weighing options, calculating risks, deciding how much truth she could afford to share. Cameron, it is Cameron, right? How much do you know about what I do for work? Your husband said you were between jobs. Mentioned you had some military experience. Sophia laughed, but there was no humor in it. Between jobs. That's one way to put it. She set down her cup and looked directly at him. What if I told you that calling in my location right now might put more people in danger than just leaving me out here? I'd say that sounds like someone who's running from something. Not running. Waiting. Waiting for what? Sophia stood again, this time walking to the edge of the clearing where she could see down into the valley below. 6 months ago, I finished what I thought was going to be my last assignment. 22 years in the military, the last 8. In units that don't officially exist, doing work that never gets written down and after-action reports. I was ready to retire, to be a normal person, to figure out what it was like to have a life that didn't involve killing people. Cameron felt his pulse quicken. This was not the conversation he'd expected to have when he'd set out to find a missing hiker. I bought the cabin in Luray, married David, started trying to figure out how to be someone who sleeps through the night and doesn't automatically scan for exit routes when she enters a room. For about 2 months, it was working. I was actually starting to believe I could do it. What changed? Sophia turned back to him, and Cameron saw that whatever she was about to tell him was the real reason she was sitting in this remote wilderness camp instead of at home with her husband. 3 weeks ago, I got a message. Not a phone call, not an email, not anything that could be traced. A message delivered through channels that only a very specific group of people know how to use. It said that my former commanding officer, a man named Colonel Harrison Webb, had been found dead in his home in Alexandria, apparent suicide. Single gunshot wound to the head. Cameron set down his coffee cup. I'm sorry for your loss, but there's more. The message said that Webb was the third member of my old unit to die by suicide in the past 6 months. Same method, same circumstances, all ruled self-inflicted by local police departments who didn't know enough to ask the right questions. You don't think they were suicides. I know they weren't, because Webb called me 2 days before his body was found. He was scared, paranoid, talking about old missions being compromised, about someone cleaning house. He said he was going to disappear for a while, that he'd contact me when it was safe. Sophia walked back to the fire and kicked dirt over it, methodically extinguishing the flames. Webb didn't kill himself, Cameron. And neither did the others. Someone is hunting my old unit, picking us off one by one. And when I got that message, I realized I had 2 choices. I could stay in Luray and wait for them to come for me, putting David in danger, or I could disappear and make them come find me on my terms. Cameron felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. So you faked your own disappearance. I told David I was going for a day hike, knowing he'd call it in when I didn't come back. I knew the search teams would follow predictable patterns, which would give me time to set up here and wait. If someone's hunting members of my old unit, they'll be watching for any unusual activity. A missing person search is perfect cover. Lots of official personnel in the area, lots of legitimate reasons for increased helicopter activity, lots of confusion and chaos to hide in. Hide from what? Sophia shouldered her pack, which Cameron now realized had been packed and ready to move. The entire time they'd been talking. From whoever killed Webb and the others. From whoever's trying to eliminate everyone who knows about the operations we ran between 2019 and 2022. From whoever thinks that just because we're out of the service, we're not still dangerous. She looked at Cameron with an expression that was part apology, part warning. I'm sorry you found me, Cameron. I really am. Because now you're part of this, whether you want to be or not. Part of what? Part of whatever happens when they realize I'm not as easy to find as the others were. Sophia adjusted her pack straps with practiced efficiency. You have a choice now. You can radio in my location and tell them you found me safe and sound. I'll go back to town, pretend everything's normal, and probably be dead within a week. Or ... Or you can trust me when I tell you that the safest place for everyone involved is for Sophia Reeves to stay missing a little while longer. Cameron stared at her, his radio heavy in his hand, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. In 12 years of search and rescue, he'd never been asked to make a choice like this. But as he looked at this woman who'd spent 6 days living invisibly in the wilderness, who moved like a predator and thought like a tactician, he realized that maybe, for the first time in his career, he'd found someone who didn't actually need rescuing. How long is a little while longer? He asked finally. Sophia smiled for the first time since he'd found her, and it was the kind of smile that would have been reassuring if it hadn't been quite so sharp around the edges. That depends on how quickly they find me. Cameron Mitchell had made a lot of decisions in his 12 years of search and rescue work, but none of them had felt quite like this one. Standing in a hidden clearing in the Shenandoah wilderness, watching a woman who was supposed to be a lost hiker dismantle a military-grade campsite with practiced efficiency. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff with no idea how deep the drop was. "Before I make any decisions," he said carefully, "I need to understand exactly what I'm getting into. You said someone's hunting your old unit. What kind of unit are we talking about?" Sophia paused in rolling up her sleeping system, a compact, high-tech setup that definitely hadn't come from any sporting goods store. The kind that doesn't exist in any official records. The kind that gets sent places where regular military can't go, to do things that can't be acknowledged. She looked at him directly. "How much do you really want to know, Cameron? Because once I tell you, you can't unknow it." Cameron thought about his radio, about the 50 people still searching the mountains for this woman, about the protocols he was supposed to follow. Then he thought about the way she moved, the way she spoke, the absolute certainty in her voice when she said that calling in her location might get people killed. "Tell me." Sophia finished securing her gear and sat back down, but this time her posture was different, more formal, more controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried the cadence of someone giving a briefing. Nighthawk was a joint special operations unit tasked with what the Pentagon likes to call direct action missions in denied areas. In practical terms, that meant we went places where the United States couldn't officially have troops, and we eliminated targets that couldn't officially be eliminated. Terrorist financiers, weapons dealers, people who were too well protected or too politically sensitive for conventional operations. Cameron felt his mouth go dry. "How many people are we talking about? In the unit?" 12 operators, rotating support staff, command structure. Small enough to move fast, big enough to handle complex operations. We worked primarily in the middle, East and North Africa between 2019 and 2022. But we also had missions in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. And now someone's killing former members. 3 confirmed dead in 6 months. All ruled suicides, all single gunshot wounds to the head. All found in their homes with no signs of forced entry. But here's what the local police didn't know to look for. All 3 were left-handed, and all 3 had entrance wounds on the right side of their heads. Cameron didn't need military training to understand the significance of that detail. Someone wanted them to look like suicides. Someone who knew enough about police procedure to stage them convincingly, but not enough about the victims to get the details right. Sophia's expression darkened. Webb wasn't just my commanding officer. He was one of the most paranoid, most careful people I've ever known. The idea that he would let someone get close enough to put a gun to his head is absurd. The idea that he would kill himself is even more absurd. So why now? Why are they being targeted? Sophia was quiet for a long moment, staring down into the valley where the morning mist was finally beginning to clear. "That's the question that's been keeping me awake at night." Nighthawk was disbanded in 2022 after a mission in Syria went sideways. We lost 2 operators, and there were political complications. The unit was officially dissolved, all records were classified or destroyed, and we were all reassigned or discharged with ironclad NDAs. But something changed. 6 months ago, there was a leak. Someone released classified documents related to several black operations conducted between 2020 and 2022. Most of it was heavily redacted, but there were enough details to make some very powerful people very nervous. Names, dates, locations that were supposed to stay buried forever. Cameron was beginning to understand. "And your unit conducted some of those operations." "We conducted most of them, including some that involved targets who had friends in very high places. People who might be willing to pay a lot of money to make sure that anyone who could provide details about those operations couldn't talk." "So you think someone's cleaning house, eliminating witnesses?" "I think someone's being very systematic about it." Webb, Rodriguez, and Chun were all careful, all experienced, all living quiet lives and keeping their mouths shut. But they were also all predictable. They had routines, patterns, places they felt safe. That's what got them killed. Sophia stood again, shouldering her pack. I decided I wasn't going to be predictable, so I became someone else. A lost hiker who wandered off a trail and vanished into the wilderness. Someone who would be impossible to find unless they wanted to be found. And you've been out here for 6 days, doing what? Waiting for them to come looking? Preparing. Sophia gestured toward the clearing, and Cameron realized that what he'd initially taken for a simple campsite was actually something much more sophisticated. This location gives me clear sight lines in 3 directions and multiple escape routes. I've got cached supplies at 4 different locations within a 2-mile radius. I've been monitoring radio traffic and watching for any unusual activity in the area. And, yesterday morning, a helicopter made 3 passes over the southern search grid. It wasn't one of the official search aircraft, wrong model, wrong markings. And it was flying a pattern that made no sense for search and rescue. Someone else is looking for me, Cameron. And they're not planning to offer me coffee when they find me. Cameron felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. So what's your plan? My plan was to stay invisible until I could figure out who's behind this and find a way to stop them. But now you've found me, which means my invisibility just got compromised. Sophia looked at him with an expression that was part apology, part calculation. They'll be monitoring search and rescue communications. The moment you call in my location, they'll know exactly where I am. So what are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to buy me some time. Report that you found signs of my passage but lost the trail. Tell them you need another day or 2 to expand the search area. That gives me time to relocate and figure out my next move. Cameron shook his head. There are 50 people out there risking their lives to find you. Your husband is going crazy with worry. I can't just. Your husband will be a lot more worried if I turn up dead in a week, Sophia interrupted. And those 50 people will be in a lot more danger if you lead whoever's hunting me right to this location. How do I know you're telling me the truth? How do I know you're not just paranoid or running from something else entirely? Sophia reached into her pack and pulled out a small, waterproof case. Inside was a satellite phone, military grade, with encryption capabilities that Cameron didn't recognize. Because in about 10 minutes, I'm expecting a call on this phone from the only other member of Nighthawk who's still alive, Jordan Palmer. They've been trying to stay off the grid, but they managed to get word to me yesterday. What kind of word? The kind that's going to tell us exactly how much trouble we're all in. Sophia checked the phone's display. And after you hear what Jordan has to say, you can decide whether you think I'm paranoid or whether you think maybe, just maybe, I know what I'm talking about. The phone buzzed once, a soft electronic sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the wilderness silence. Sophia answered on the first ring. Jordan. Cameron couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he could see Sophia's face growing more tense with each passing second. Her knuckles went white where she gripped the phone, and when she finally spoke, her voice was tight with controlled anger. When? A pause. How many? Another pause. Are you secure? The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but when Sophia hung up, Cameron could see that whatever she'd just learned had changed everything. What is it? He asked. Sophia looked at him with eyes that had gone completely cold, and when she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that came from someone who was used to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. Jordan's been compromised. They found them in a safe house in Denver 3 hours ago. But they managed to get away, and before they ran, they got a look at who was hunting them. Sophia's expression was grim. It's not freelancers, Cameron. It's not some criminal organization trying to silence witnesses. It's a kill team, and they're using active military assets. Cameron felt the ground shift beneath his feet again. Military assets? Which means this isn't about keeping secrets anymore. This is about something bigger. Something that someone in the government thinks is worth killing American veterans to protect. Sophia stood, her pack secured, her posture alert and ready to move. So here's your choice, Cameron. You can walk away right now, call in my location, and pretend this conversation never happened. In which case, I'll probably be dead by tomorrow, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering whether you could have prevented it. Or you can trust me when I tell you that I know how to handle this. And you can help me stay missing long enough to figure out who wants me dead and why. Cameron looked at his radio, then back at Sophia. In 12 years of search and rescue, he'd never walked away from someone who needed help. But as he looked at this woman who moved like a weapon and thought like a soldier, he realized that maybe, for the first time in his career, the person who most needed rescuing wasn't the one who was lost. It was everyone else. Cameron Mitchell had always prided himself on being a man who followed protocols. 12 years of search and rescue work had taught him that procedures existed for good reasons, that improvisation could get people killed, and that the safest course of action was usually the one outlined in the manual. But standing in a hidden clearing in the Virginia wilderness, listening to a former Black Ops operator explain why calling in her rescue might trigger a government assassination, he realized that none of his training had prepared him for this moment. I need proof, he said finally. Before I risk my career, my reputation, and possibly my life, I need something more than your word that this is real. Sophia nodded, as if she'd been expecting the request. Fair enough. She pulled out the satellite phone again and scrolled through a series of encrypted files. Jordan sent me these before they had to run. The first image showed a man in his 50s lying on a kitchen floor. Blood pooled around his head. The scene looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like, a suicide. But Sophia zoomed in on details that Cameron wouldn't have noticed. The angle of the body, the position of the weapon, small inconsistencies that painted a different picture. This is Rodriguez, former Nighthawk demolitions expert. Officially ruled a suicide 3 months ago in Phoenix. She swiped to the next image. This is Chun, communications specialist. Found dead in his apartment in Seattle 6 weeks later. The second scene was nearly identical, same positioning, same method, same apparent cause of death. But again, Sophia pointed out details that told a different story. The wrong hand holding the weapon. Blood spatter patterns that didn't match self-inflicted wounds. Signs of a struggle that had been carefully cleaned up, but not completely erased. And this, she said, showing him a third image, is Colonel Webb. Cameron studied the photos, his search and rescue training kicking in. He'd seen enough accident scenes, enough traumatic deaths, to recognize when something was off. And these were definitely off. Okay, he said slowly. I believe you that these weren't suicides. But that doesn't necessarily mean there's more. Sophia pulled up a series of documents on the phone. Jordan managed to hack into the FBI database before they ran. Take a look at who's been assigned to investigate these suicides. Cameron scanned the files. 3 different cases, 3 different cities, but the same name appeared in each investigation. Special Agent Marcus Cole, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Counterintelligence Division. The same agent had been present at all 3 death scenes, had filed all 3 reports recommending closure of the cases, and had classified all 3 investigations under national security provisions. 1 agent, 3 cities, 3 supposedly unrelated suicides, Sophia said. What are the odds? Pretty slim, Cameron admitted. But maybe, and here's the interesting part. Sophia showed him another document. Marcus Cole doesn't exist. Jordan ran his credentials through every federal database they could access. No employment history, no training records, no background check files. He's a ghost, Cameron. Someone created an identity specifically for cleaning up these cases. Cameron felt his skepticism beginning to crumble. But why? What could your unit have done that would be worth this much effort to cover up? Sophia was quiet for a long moment, staring into the distance where the Blue Ridge Mountains rolled away toward the horizon. When she spoke, her voice was careful, measured, like someone walking through a minefield. "There's something I haven't told you about our last mission, the one that got Nighthawk disbanded." "What about it?" "We were sent to Syria to eliminate a high-value target, a financier who was funding terrorist operations across the region. Intelligence indicated he would be at a compound outside Aleppo for a meeting with other key figures. It was supposed to be a clean in-and-out operation." Cameron waited for her to continue. "But when we got there, the intelligence was wrong. It wasn't a terrorist meeting. It was a peace negotiation. Representatives from several Syrian factions, international mediators, people who were trying to broker a ceasefire that could have ended years of conflict. You killed peace negotiators." "We killed everyone in that compound, Cameron. 12 people who were trying to end a war, not continue one. And we did it based on intelligence that was either catastrophically wrong or deliberately falsified." The weight of her words settled between them like a physical presence. Cameron could see the pain in her eyes, the guilt that she'd been carrying. For 2 years, the mission was classified at the highest levels. Official records show that we eliminated a terrorist cell and prevented a major attack. But we knew what we'd really done. And more importantly, we knew that someone had sent us there knowing exactly what we would find. Someone set you up. Someone used Nighthawk to eliminate people who were getting in the way of continued conflict in Syria. People who had political reasons for wanting that war to continue, who were making money from the chaos and didn't want it to end. Cameron was beginning to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. And now someone's worried that you might talk about what really happened. The leaked documents that surfaced 6 months ago? They included partial records of that Syria mission. Not enough detail to prove what really happened, but enough to raise questions. Enough to make some very powerful people very nervous. Sophia's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her expression immediately became more tense. "Jordan's on the move. They managed to get surveillance footage of the team that hit their safe house." She showed Cameron the message. 4 operators, military equipment, coordinated assault. "This is bigger than we thought." "How much bigger?" "Big enough that someone's willing to deploy active military assets on American soil to silence former operators. Big enough that they've created false federal identities to cover up their tracks. Big enough that they're systematically hunting down anyone who could expose what really happened in Syria." Cameron's radio crackled to life, making them both freeze. "Base to Mitchell, what's your status, over?" Cameron looked at Sophia, then at his radio, then back at Sophia. The moment of decision had arrived. He could key that radio, report his location, and let the system handle whatever came next. Or he could take a leap of faith based on the word of a woman he'd known for less than an hour. "Mitchell, please respond. We have air assets inbound to your sector. Over." Sophia's expression sharpened. "Air assets? That's not standard for search and rescue. Base, this is Mitchell." Cameron keyed his radio, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "I've found signs of the missing hiker's passage, but lost the trail at a creek crossing. Requesting permission to expand search radius. Over." "Copy that, Mitchell. Be advised we have a helicopter conducting aerial reconnaissance in your area. Stay clear of landing zones. Over." Cameron looked at Sophia. "Helicopter reconnaissance isn't standard either." "No, it's not." Sophia was already moving, breaking down the last of her camp with efficient, practiced motions. "And I'm betting it's not one of your aircraft." As if summoned by her words, the distant sound of rotor blades began to echo through the mountains, growing steadily louder. But it wasn't coming from the direction of the official search operation. It was coming from the south, from an area where no legitimate search aircraft had any reason to be. "We need to move," Sophia said, shouldering her pack. "Now." Cameron followed her toward the tree line, his mind racing. "Where are we going?" "Away. From here. And then we're going to find out exactly who's in that helicopter." Sophia's voice carried the cold determination of someone who had decided to stop running and start hunting. "Because I'm tired of being the target, Cameron. It's time to turn the tables." As they disappeared into the dense forest, the sound of the helicopter grew louder, its rotors beating the air like mechanical thunder. Behind them, the clearing where Cameron had found Sophia was empty, except for the scattered ashes of a fire that had been carefully extinguished. But the hunters who were about to land there would find no trace of their quarry. Because Sophia Reeves had just stopped being a missing person and had become something much more dangerous. She had become a ghost with a mission. The helicopter's rotor wash bent the treetops as it circled the clearing they'd just abandoned, creating a storm of leaves and debris that rained down through the forest canopy. Cameron crouched beside Sophia behind a fallen oak, his heart hammering, as he watched the aircraft through the gaps in the foliage. It was black, unmarked, and definitely not part of any search and rescue operation he'd ever seen. Military? He whispered. Sophia had pulled out a compact pair of binoculars and was studying the helicopter with the focused intensity of someone conducting a tactical assessment. Modified Black Hawk, sound suppression packages, enhanced optics, external weapon mounts. That's not search and rescue, Cameron. That's a hunter-killer. The helicopter settled into a hover over the clearing, and Cameron could see figures rappelling down ropes with mechanical precision. 4 operators dressed in black tactical gear, moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of extensive training and experience. "How did they find us so fast?" Cameron asked. "They didn't find us. They found my campsite." Sophia lowered the binoculars, her expression grim. "Which means they've been tracking the search operation, waiting for someone to locate me. The moment you called in signs of my passage, they moved." Cameron felt a chill of realization. They were listening to search and rescue communications. More than that, they probably have someone inside the search operation. Someone who's been feeding them information about search patterns, personnel locations, communication protocols. Sophia began moving deeper into the forest, staying low and keeping to the dense undergrowth. "We need to get to higher ground where I can get a clear signal on the satellite phone." "Why?" "Because Jordan's going to want to know that active military assets are operating in Virginia. And because we need to find out who authorized this operation." They climbed through the forest for 20 minutes, moving parallel to a ridgeline that would give them both elevation and concealment. Sophia moved like she was born in the wilderness, her footsteps silent, her path chosen to avoid broken branches and disturbed ground that might leave a trail. Cameron, despite his years of experience in these mountains, found himself struggling to keep up with her pace and stealth. When they reached a rocky outcrop that offered both cover and a clear view of the valley below, Sophia pulled out the satellite phone and powered it up. While she waited for a signal lock, Cameron used his own binoculars to scan the area around her abandoned campsite. The tactical team had spread out in a professional search pattern, moving through the clearing with methodical precision. They weren't just looking for signs of recent occupation. They were collecting evidence, taking photographs, bagging samples. This wasn't a capture operation. It was a crime scene investigation. "They're treating it like a forensic site," Cameron observed. "Because they are. They're not just hunting me, they're building a case. Documentation that will justify whatever they do when they find me." Sophia's phone finally acquired a signal, and she dialed a number from memory. "Jordan, it's me. We have a problem." Cameron could hear the tension in her voice as she described the helicopter, the tactical team, the professional level of the operation that was hunting her. The conversation was brief, conducted in a kind of shorthand that spoke of years of working together under pressure. "Understood," she said finally. Stay mobile. I'll contact you in 12 hours. What did they say? Cameron asked as she ended the call. Jordan's intel was right. This isn't just about silencing Nighthawk veterans. According to their sources, there's been a contract issued through black budget channels. A kill order authorized at the highest levels, targeting all remaining Nighthawk personnel. A kill order? From who? That's the million-dollar question. But Jordan thinks they know who's behind it. Sophia began disassembling the satellite phone, preparing to move again. Remember what I told you about our last mission? The peace negotiators. We killed? Yeah, one of them was Dr. Amira Hassan. She was a Syrian-American academic who had been working as an unofficial mediator between various faction leaders. Her work was getting close to brokering a ceasefire that would have ended the conflict. Cameron waited for her to continue. Dr. Hassan was also the daughter of Congressman Michael Hassan, who sits on the House Intelligence Committee and has been one of the most vocal critics of American military involvement in Syria. Sophia's voice was tight with controlled anger. We didn't just kill peace negotiators, Cameron. We killed a sitting congressman's daughter. The implications hit Cameron like a physical blow. Jesus Christ, it gets worse. The leaked documents. That surfaced 6 months ago. They didn't just contain partial records of the Syria mission. They contained communications intercepts that suggested Hassan's daughter wasn't supposed to be at that compound. Someone had leaked her location to ensure she would be there when we arrived. Someone wanted her dead specifically. Someone wanted her dead, and they wanted Nighthawk to be the weapon that killed her. We were set up, Cameron. Used as unwitting assassins in what was essentially a political murder. Sophia finished packing the phone and stood, scanning the forest around them. And now that the truth is starting to come out, someone's decided that the easiest way to contain the damage is to eliminate everyone who was there. But if this goes all the way up to congressional level, how do you fight it? How do you expose something this big, carefully, and with a lot of help? Sophia began moving along the ridgeline, heading toward what Cameron recognized as the old fire tower road. Jordan thinks they've identified who's been issuing the kill orders. A deputy director at the CIA named Patricia Vance. She was Hassan's handler for Middle East operations, and she's the one who provided the intelligence that sent us to that compound. So she's cleaning up her own mess. She's protecting herself and whoever she was working with. But here's the thing about people like Vance. They're bureaucrats first, operators second. They think in terms of paperwork and procedure. They don't expect their targets to fight back. Cameron could see the old fire tower through the trees. Ahead of them, its steel framework rising above the canopy like a skeletal finger pointing at the sky. And you're planning to fight back. I'm planning to do what I was trained to do. Gather intelligence, identify targets, and eliminate threats. Sophia's voice carried the cold professionalism of someone who had made a decision and was committed to seeing it through. The difference is, this time I'm choosing my own mission. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They reached the base of the fire tower as the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows through the forest. The structure was old but solid, built in the 1960s and abandoned when satellite monitoring made such towers obsolete. Cameron had been here before on training exercises, but he'd never climbed it with someone who was planning to use it as a base of operations for what amounted to a one-woman war against the CIA. This is insane, he said as Sophia began checking the tower's structural integrity. You're talking about going up against people with unlimited resources, government backing, and military assets. You're one person. I'm one person with 22 years of training in exactly this kind of operation. Sophia tested the first few rungs of the ladder, then began climbing with easy confidence. And I'm not planning to do this alone. What do you mean? I mean, there are other people who want answers about what happened in Syria. People who have been asking questions that haven't been answered. People who have resources of their own. Cameron followed her up the ladder, his fear of heights warring with his curiosity about what she was planning. What kind of people? The kind who don't like it when American special operations units are used to assassinate peace negotiators. The kind who think that maybe Congressman Hassan deserves to know who really killed his daughter and why. They reached the top of the tower as the last light faded from the western sky. The observation deck offered a panoramic view of the Blue Ridge Mountains, but more importantly, it provided clear sight lines in all directions and multiple escape routes if they were discovered. Sophia set up what Cameron recognized as a sophisticated communications array, using equipment that definitely hadn't come from any civilian source. As she worked, she continued talking, her voice calm and professional, despite the magnitude of what she was describing. Jordan isn't the only Nighthawk survivor who's been staying in touch. There are 2 others who managed to disappear before the kill teams found them. And there are people in Congress, in the media, in other intelligence agencies who have been investigating the Syria incident independently. So what's the plan? Sophia powered up her equipment and began entering coordinates and frequencies that Cameron couldn't follow. The plan is to stop running and start hunting. To gather enough evidence to expose what really happened and who's responsible. And to make sure that the people who used us as unwitting assassins face consequences for what they did. She looked at Cameron with an expression that was part determination, part regret. But first, we need to deal with the immediate problem. The kill team that's hunting me isn't going to give up just because I've disappeared into the woods. They're going to keep searching, and eventually they're going to expand their operation to include anyone who might have helped me. Anyone like me, anyone like you. Which means you have 2 choices, Cameron. You can walk away right now, go back to your life, and hope they don't decide you're a security risk. Or ... Or you can help me turn the tables on the people who think they can murder American veterans to cover up their crimes. Cameron looked out over the darkening mountains, thinking about the search team still looking for a woman who didn't want to be found, about the tactical operators who were hunting someone they thought was helpless, about the bureaucrats who believed they could eliminate witnesses without consequences. He thought about the oath he'd taken when he'd started doing search and rescue work. To help people in danger, to risk his own safety for others, to never abandon someone who needed help. For the first time in his career, he realized that the person who most needed help wasn't the one who was lost, that it was the country that had lost its way. The fire tower had been built to watch for threats that could destroy the forest. Now, 60 years later, Cameron Mitchell found himself using it to watch for threats that could destroy lives. He sat in the darkness of the observation deck, scanning the valley below through night vision binoculars, while Sophia worked at her communications array, reaching out to contacts in a world he was only beginning to understand. "Movement, southeast sector," he whispered, spotting the faint glow of infrared. "Signatures moving through the forest. 3 contacts, maybe 4. They're following the old logging road." Sophia didn't look up from her equipment. Distance? 2 miles, maybe less. They're moving slow, methodical. Professional search pattern. They'll reach the base of the tower in about 40 minutes if they maintain that pace. Sophia's fingers moved across her keyboard with practiced efficiency. "That gives me enough time to finish this." Cameron lowered the binoculars. "Finish what?" "Making contact with someone who can help us level the playing field." Sophia's screen showed a complex encryption interface that looked like something out of a spy movie. Jordan wasn't the only one who's been investigating the Syria incident. There's a journalist named Sarah Chun, no relation to our deceased teammate, who's been following the money trail behind Middle East defense contracts. A journalist? How is that going to help us? Because Sarah Chun isn't just any journalist. She's an investigative reporter for the Washington Post who specializes in intelligence community corruption. And more importantly, she's been trying to interview Congressman Hassan about his daughter's death for 6 months. Cameron felt a flicker of hope. Hassan doesn't know what really happened. Hassan knows his daughter was killed in what was officially described as a counterterrorism operation. But he's been asking questions about the intelligence that led to that operation, questions that have been stonewalled at every level. Sophia's screen flickered as an encrypted connection established. Sarah Chun thinks Hassan suspects theirs. More to the story, she just hasn't been able to prove it. And now she's about to get proof from someone who was there. Sophia began typing rapidly, her message appearing in blocks of encrypted text. I'm sending her everything Jordan and I have compiled. Photos of the crime scenes, evidence of the fake FBI agent, details about the Syria mission, communications. Intercepts that show Hassan's daughter was deliberately targeted. Cameron watched the infrared signatures in the distance, noting that they had spread out into a wider search pattern. They're getting closer. Good. Let them come. Sophia's voice carried a confidence that Cameron found both reassuring and terrifying. Because in about 10 minutes, Sarah Chun is going to publish a story that will make it very difficult for anyone to claim this is about national security. What kind of story? The kind that asks why former Nighthawk operators are being systematically murdered. The kind that questions whether the Syria operation was actually a counterterrorism mission or a political assassination. The kind that includes leaked documents showing a connection between Deputy Director Patricia Vance and the intelligence that sent us to kill Hassan's daughter. Cameron could see the tactical implications of what she was describing. You're forcing them out into the open. I'm making it impossible for them to operate in the shadows. Once this story breaks, every move they make will be scrutinized. Every death will be questioned. Every cover-up will be exposed. Sophia's screen chimed with an incoming message. She read it quickly, then smiled for the first time since Cameron had found her. Sarah Chun just got confirmation from her editor. The story goes live in the morning edition. Front page above the fold with a follow-up investigation already scheduled. Sophia began shutting down her equipment, which means we need to survive the next 12 hours. And then we stop being the hunted and become the hunters. The sound of rotor blades echoed through the darkness, much closer than before. Cameron raised his binoculars and spotted the helicopter moving in a search pattern about a mile to the south. Its searchlight cutting through the forest canopy like a blade. They brought air support, he observed. Of course they did. They're getting desperate. Sophia finished packing her equipment with efficient, practiced movements. But helicopters have limitations. They can't hover indefinitely. They can't land in dense forest. And they're vulnerable to ground fire from someone who knows what they're doing. Please tell me you're not thinking about shooting down a helicopter. I'm thinking about making them reconsider the cost-benefit analysis of this operation. Sophia moved to the edge of the observation deck, studying the approaching aircraft. That's a Black Hawk with external fuel tanks. Range of about 350 miles, which means they're operating from a base within 175 miles of here. Probably a private airfield military contractor facility, or CIA black site. Cameron watched her calculate angles and distances with the kind of precision that spoke of years of experience in similar situations. How do you know all this? Because 22 years ago, I was 19 years old and desperate to serve my country. I spent the next 2 decades learning everything there was to know about aircraft, weapons, tactics, and operations. I became very, very good at my job. Sophia's voice carried a mixture of pride and regret. The problem is, my job was killing people. And I was so focused on being good at it that I didn't ask enough questions about whether the people I was killing deserved to die. The helicopter was close enough now that Cameron could hear the change in engine pitch as it adjusted its search pattern. The searchlight swept across the forest below them, probing the darkness for any sign of movement. "They're systematic," Sophia observed. "Professional. Military or ex-military contractors with access to current intelligence and equipment. This isn't some black ops cleanup crew. This is an official operation, authorized and funded through legitimate channels. Which means someone very high up in the government has decided that silencing Nighthawk veterans is worth the risk of deploying military assets on American soil." Sophia shouldered her pack and checked her sidearm. Someone with the authority to authorize kill orders and the resources to carry them out. The helicopter's searchlight swept across the base of the fire tower, illuminating the steel framework in stark white light. Cameron held his breath, but the aircraft moved on without detecting their presence in the observation deck 60 feet above. "How long before they figure out we're up here?" he asked. "Depends on how thorough they are. The tower doesn't show up on most current maps, but if they have access to historical surveys or local knowledge, they'll check it eventually." Sophia moved to the ladder that led down from the observation deck. "Which is why we're not going to be here when they do." "Where are we going?" "Somewhere they won't expect. Somewhere that will give us an advantage instead of just another place to hide." Sophia began climbing down the ladder, moving with the same silent efficiency she'd shown all day. "There's an abandoned ranger station about 3 miles northeast of here, built in the 1940s, decommissioned in the 1980s, forgotten by everyone except people who know these mountains really well." Cameron followed her down, his mind racing. "What's special about it?" "It has something our current position lacks. Underground facilities. Cold War-era communication bunkers that were built to survive nuclear attacks. Hardened against electromagnetic interference, isolated from external monitoring, and stocked with equipment that might still be functional." They reached the ground. As the helicopter completed another search pattern, its rotor wash bending the trees around the tower, Cameron could hear the tactical team on the ground getting closer, their radio chatter barely audible through the forest. "If we can reach the ranger station without being detected, we'll have a secure base of operations and communication capabilities that can't be jammed or monitored." Sophia began moving through the forest with the same ghost-like stealth she'd shown earlier. "More importantly, we'll have access to backup communication. Systems that can reach people outside the normal intelligence community infrastructure." "What kind of people?" "The kind who don't like it when their government uses military assets to murder veterans on American soil. The kind who think that maybe the Constitution still means something." Sophia paused at the edge of a clearing, scanning for threats before moving across the open ground. Congressional oversight committees, inspector general offices, military personnel who took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Cameron followed her across the clearing, staying low and moving fast. Behind them, the helicopter's searchlight continued its methodical sweep, but they were already beyond its range. "And if none of that works?" Cameron asked. Sophia stopped at the edge of the forest on the far side of the clearing and turned back to look at him. In the faint moonlight, her expression was calm, determined, and absolutely ruthless. "Then I go back to doing what I was trained to do. I identify targets, I gather intelligence, and I eliminate threats to national security." She resumed moving through the forest. "The only difference is, this time the threats are wearing American uniforms." Cameron followed her into the darkness, wondering what he'd gotten himself into, and whether they would live long enough to see the morning edition of the Washington Post that might change everything. Behind them, the helicopter continued its search, its mechanical thunder echoing through the mountains like the heartbeat of something vast and implacable. But ahead of them lay the promise of answers, of justice, and of the kind of reckoning that came when ghosts decided to stop hiding and start haunting their enemies. The abandoned ranger station materialized out of the darkness like a relic from another era. built into a natural depression between two hills. The compound consisted of several wooden buildings connected by covered walkways, all of it designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding forest. What Cameron couldn't see from the surface were the concrete bunkers that Sophia had described, buried beneath the main structure and invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. "How do you know about this place?" Cameron whispered as they approached the perimeter. "Nighthawk used it as a training site in 2021. We ran exercises in underground operations, simulated bunker assaults, communication security protocols." Sophia moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had memorized every detail of the terrain. What the official records don't show is that we also used it as contingency plans for operating independently if our normal command structure was compromised. Contingency plans for going rogue, contingency plans for situations exactly like this one. Sophia reached what looked like an ordinary maintenance shed at the rear of the compound. She knelt beside a rusted ventilation grate and began working on what Cameron realized was a hidden locking mechanism. When you operate in black programs, you learn to plan for the possibility that your own government might someday consider you a liability. The grate swung open, revealing a narrow shaft that descended into darkness. Sophia pulled out a compact flashlight and shined it down the tunnel, illuminating concrete walls and metal stairs that looked like they'd been built to last centuries. "After you," she said. Cameron had explored caves and underground facilities before in his search and rescue work, but this was different. The tunnel had been engineered by people who understood that sometimes the greatest threats came from above ground. The walls were thick concrete, the air circulation system was still functional, and the stairs were solid steel anchored with heavy bolts that showed no signs of corrosion despite decades of abandonment. They descended 20 feet before the tunnel opened into a larger space. Sophia's flashlight revealed a communications center that looked like something from a Cold War movie. Banks of electronic equipment, massive radio transmitters, backup power systems, and displays that showed status readings for systems Cameron couldn't identify. "Most of this equipment is from the 1960s and 70s, Sophia explained as she began powering up systems with practiced efficiency. "But that's actually an advantage. Modern surveillance networks are designed to monitor digital communications, satellite transmissions, cellular networks. They're not set up to track analog radio systems that were built before the internet existed." Cameron watched displays flicker to life around the room, showing signal strength readings, frequency patterns, and communication channels that spanned the eastern seaboard. "This is all still functional?" The military doesn't just abandon facilities like this. They mothball them, maintain them, keep them ready for reactivation if needed. Sophia sat down at what appeared to be the main communications console. During the Cold War, places like this were considered critical backup infrastructure. The idea was that if Washington was destroyed in a nuclear attack, regional command centers could continue coordinating resistance operations. "And now you're using it to coordinate resistance operations against Washington." "I'm using it to communicate with people who still believe in the rule of law." Sophia began entering frequencies and codes that had obviously been memorized long ago. People who think that maybe using military assets to murder veterans crosses a line that shouldn't be crossed. The first contact came through 20 minutes later. Cameron couldn't hear the conversation. Sophia was using a headset and speaking in the kind of coded language that revealed nothing to casual listeners, but he could see the tension in her posture as she received information from whoever was on the other end. "What is it?" he asked when she finished the call. "Sarah Chun's story went live an hour ago. It's already being picked up by other major news outlets, and congressional offices are starting to ask questions." Sophia's expression was grim, but it's also triggered a response. "Jordan's contact in the intelligence community says there's been a significant escalation in the hunt for remaining Nighthawk personnel." "What kind of escalation?" Kill teams have been deployed to 3 other locations where former Nighthawk members might be hiding. Not just the 2 survivors we know about, but anyone who might have had contact with Nighthawk operations. Sophia turned to face him directly, including family members, friends, and anyone who might have information about what really happened. In Syria, Cameron felt his blood run cold. They're expanding the target list. They're trying to contain the story before it gains more momentum. But here's the thing about trying to contain a story by killing more people. It tends to have the opposite effect. Sophia stood and moved to another bank of equipment, especially when those people have friends in Congress who are already asking uncomfortable questions. The radio crackled with another incoming transmission. This time, Sophia put it on speaker so Cameron could hear. "Ghost Fox, this is Oversight. We have confirmation that Patricia Vance has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Repeat, Vance is no longer operational." Sophia keyed the microphone. "Copy that, Oversight. What's the status on active operations?" "Multiple assets have been recalled. Official word is that the Syria investigation has been transferred to the Inspector General's office. Unofficial word is that someone very high up is trying to distance themselves from this mess. And the kill teams?" There was a pause before the response came. "Still active. Whoever's running them now is operating outside normal command structure. They're not responding to recall orders." Sophia exchanged a look with Cameron. "So we've cut off the head, but the body's still moving." "Looks that way. Ghost Fox, you need to know that your current location may be compromised. We're tracking increased military aviation activity in your area, and there are reports of ground teams moving through the national forest." "How many?" "At least 12 operators, possibly more. They're not using standard communication protocols, so we can't get an exact count." Cameron felt the walls of the bunker closing in around them. 12 operators? That's an army. "That's a company-level assault force," Sophia corrected. "Which means someone's decided that subtlety is no longer an option." She keyed the microphone. Again, "Oversight, do we have any idea who's giving the orders now that Vance is sidelined?" "Negative. The operational authority seems to have shifted to a compartmentalized program that we can't penetrate. But Ghost Fox, there's something else you need to know." "Go ahead." "Congressman Hassan is dead." The words hit the bunker like a physical blow. Sophia's knuckles went white where she gripped the microphone, and Cameron felt his stomach drop. "When?" Sophia asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. 3 hours ago. Apparent heart attack at his home in Alexandria. But the timing is suspicious, especially given that he was scheduled to hold a press conference tomorrow morning about his daughter's death. Sophia stood slowly, her face pale in the electronic glow of the equipment around them. "They killed him. They killed the one person who could have demanded a real investigation. It appears that way. But Ghost Fox, Hassan wasn't working alone. He had allies in Congress, people who were helping him investigate the Syria incident. His death is going to raise more questions, not fewer. Maybe, but it also eliminates the most credible voice calling for accountability." Sophia began shutting down the communications equipment. "Oversight, we're going dark for a while. If you don't hear from me in 24 hours, assume the worst. Understood. Good hunting, Ghost Fox." The radio fell silent, leaving Cameron and Sophia alone in the underground bunker with the weight of what they'd just learned. Hassan's death meant that the people they were fighting were willing to kill a sitting member of Congress to protect their secrets. It meant that the stakes had just escalated beyond anything Cameron had imagined. "They're not just cleaning house anymore," Sophia said quietly. "They're burning it down. So what do we do?" Sophia moved to a wall locker that Cameron hadn't noticed before. Inside was an arsenal that would have been impressive in a military armory: assault rifles, tactical gear, explosives, night vision equipment, and weapon systems that he couldn't identify. "We do what Nighthawk was trained to do," she said. selecting equipment with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. We identify high-value targets, we gather actionable intelligence, and we eliminate threats to national security. But we're just two people. No, we're not. Sophia handed him a tactical vest and a compact submachine gun. We're two people with 22 years of training, extensive knowledge of enemy tactics, and nothing left to lose. And more importantly, we're two people who know something our enemies don't. What's that? Sophia smiled, and it was the kind of smile that would have made her enemies reconsider their life choices if they'd been smart enough to recognize it. We know this terrain better than they do. We know these mountains, these bunkers, these escape routes. They're operating in our backyard now. She shouldered her own gear and moved toward a different tunnel that led deeper into the facility. And ghosts are always more dangerous on familiar ground. Cameron followed her into the darkness, wondering if he was about to become a hero or a terrorist, and realizing that in situations like this one, the difference might be nothing more. Then who got to write the history books? The tunnel system beneath the ranger station was more extensive than Cameron had imagined. What had started as a simple communications bunker revealed itself to be part of a network of underground facilities that stretched for nearly a quarter-mile beneath the mountain, connected by reinforced concrete passages that could withstand direct artillery strikes. Sophia moved through the maze with the confidence of someone who had memorized every detail during her training exercises 3 years earlier. "Where exactly are we going?" Cameron asked as they passed through what appeared to be a storage facility, filled with military equipment covered by dust and tarps. "Emergency exit." The original designers built this place with multiple escape routes in case the primary entrance was compromised. Sophia paused at an intersection where 3 tunnels branched off in different directions. But more importantly, "We're going to a position where we can observe the enemy's approach and choose the terms of engagement." Engagement? I thought we were trying to avoid a fight. We were. But they just killed a sitting member of Congress to cover up their crimes, which means they've crossed a line that puts them outside the protection of law and order. Sophia's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who had made a tactical decision. When you're dealing with people who operate outside the law, you have to be prepared to do the same. They emerged from the tunnel system through a concealed exit that brought them out on a hillside nearly half a mile from the main ranger station. The exit was hidden beneath what looked like a natural rock formation, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. From their position, they had a clear view of the valley below and the approaches that any assault force would have to use. Cameron used his binoculars to scan the area while Sophia set up what he recognized as a sophisticated observation post. Night vision scopes, communications equipment, and weapons positioned to cover multiple fields of fire. "Movement," Cameron reported. "Northwest sector. Looks like a 4-man team moving along the old fire road. I see them." Sophia was tracking the same team through her own scope. Professional spacing, proper tactical formation, night vision equipment. Definitely military or ex-military contractors. Are those the same guys from earlier? No, different team, different approach vector. Which means they've got at least 8 operators in the field, probably more. Sophia began making notes on a tactical map that showed the terrain around the ranger station. They're conducting a coordinated assault from multiple directions. Cameron watched more figures emerge from the forest, moving with the kind of disciplined precision that spoke of extensive training and experience. "How many do you think?" "Based on the search patterns and approach vectors, I'd estimate 12 to 16 operators. Company-level assault force with air support and communication backup." Sophia's assessment was delivered with the calm professionalism of someone conducting a routine briefing. "Overkill for 2 fugitives, which suggests they're not planning to take prisoners. So what's our play? We let them establish their assault positions, identify their command structure and support elements, Then we eliminate their leadership and extract actionable intelligence about who's giving the orders. Sophia checked her weapons and equipment with methodical precision. The key is to make them believe they have the advantage right up until the moment we turn the tables. Cameron felt his mouth go dry. You're talking about killing people. I'm talking about defending ourselves against people who are trying to kill us. People who have already murdered at least 4 veterans and a member of Congress. Sophia's voice carried no emotion, just the cold calculation of someone who had made peace with what needed to be done. The difference between murder and legitimate self-defense is usually determined by who shoots first. The radio in Sophia's gear crackled with intercepted communications from the assault force. The transmissions were encrypted, but she had equipment that could break the basic military codes they were using. Bravo team in position, southwest approach. Charlie team moving to blocking position, northeast sector. Alpha team preparing to breach primary structure. Sophia listened to the chatter for several minutes, mapping the positions and identifying the command structure based on communication patterns and tactical call signs. They're using standard small unit tactics, she observed. 3 assault teams. 1 command element, probably air support on standby. Textbook approach for clearing a defended position. Except we're not in the position they think we're defending. Exactly. They're about to assault an empty bunker while we observe from a position they don't know exists. Sophia began preparing her weapons, checking ammunition and adjusting equipment for what was about to come. The question is, do we let them discover the bunker is empty and regroup, or do we take action while they're committed to the assault? Cameron watched the tactical teams moving into position around the ranger station. They moved with the kind of coordination that spoke of months of training together, the kind of unit cohesion that made them extremely dangerous, but also predictable. What kind of action? The kind that sends a message to whoever's giving the orders. The kind that makes them understand that hunting Nighthawk veterans isn't going to be as easy as they thought. Sophia shouldered her rifle and began moving toward a position that would give her a clear field of fire. War crimes have consequences, Cameron, even when they're committed by people wearing American uniforms. The assault began at 0347 hours with the methodical precision of a military operation. Flashbang grenades detonated inside the main ranger station building, followed by the crash of doors being breached and the sharp commands of operators clearing rooms. Cameron could hear the systematic search taking place, even from their position. Half a mile away. They're good, Sophia observed, tracking the operation through her night vision scope. Professional, disciplined, thorough. But they're also predictable. Military training teaches you to follow procedures, to rely on established tactics. It doesn't teach you to think like a ghost. And you do? I've had 3 years to think about what I would do if I ever had to fight my own government. 3 years to plan for exactly this scenario. Sophia's scope was focused on what appeared to be the command element. 2 figures positioned on a hill overlooking the assault, coordinating the operation through radio communications. The advantage of being paranoid is that you're usually prepared for the worst-case scenario. The radio chatter changed tone as the assault teams discovered that the bunker was empty. Cameron could hear the confusion in their voices as they reported negative contact. No signs of recent occupation, and no indication that their targets had ever been in the facility. Alpha Team, this is command. Expand search perimeter. There. In the area. Roger, command. Bravo and Charlie teams, expand to secondary search zones. Sophia smiled grimly. And now they're exactly where we want them. Spread out, confused, operating in terrain they don't know against an enemy they can't locate. She keyed her own radio, broadcasting on the frequency the assault teams were using. Her voice was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its certainty. Unknown assault force. This is Ghost Fox. You are conducting an illegal military operation on American soil against American veterans. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this area before I consider you enemy combatants. The radio fell silent. Cameron could see the assault teams freezing in position, trying to locate the source of the transmission. Ghost Fox, this is Operation. Commander, you are wanted for questioning in connection with matters of national security. Surrender immediately, and you will not be harmed. Sophia's response was delivered with the kind of cold professionalism that left no doubt about her intentions. Operation Commander, you just lied to me. Your orders are to eliminate all night. Hawk survivors, not question them. You murdered my teammates, you killed Congressman Hassan, and now you're hunting me with military assets on American soil. Her voice carried across the frequency like a judge pronouncing sentence. That makes you enemy combatants. And I've spent 22 years learning how to deal with enemy combatants. The silence that followed was filled with the tension of predators suddenly realizing they might be prey. 30 seconds, Sophia added. Starting now. Cameron watched through his binoculars as the assault teams began to move, but not in retreat. They were repositioning for a fight, spreading out in search patterns designed to locate and eliminate a sniper threat. They're not withdrawing, he observed. I didn't think they would. Sophia settled into a firing position, her rifle steady, and her breathing controlled, which means they just made the last mistake they'll ever make. The first shot broke the mountain silence like thunder, and Cameron realized that Sophia Reeves had just declared war on the people who thought they could murder American veterans with impunity. The age of running and hiding was over. The age of consequences had begun. The first shot was precise, calculated, and devastating. Cameron watched through his binoculars as the operation commander, the figure who had been coordinating the assault from his elevated position, simply crumpled, his radio still transmitting the last word he would ever speak. The silence that followed was filled with the kind of confusion that came when professional soldiers suddenly realized they were facing someone who was better at their job than they were. Target down, Sophia reported calmly, already shifting her aim to the second figure in the command element. Command structure is compromised. The radio erupted with panicked chatter as the assault teams tried to process what had just happened. Cameron could hear the discipline beginning to crack as operators who had expected an easy cleanup operation found themselves under precision fire from a sniper they couldn't locate. Command is down. Command is down. Where's the shooter? Unknown. Sniper, northwest quadrant. Alpha team, moved to. The second shot cut off the transmission as Sophia eliminated the backup commander. The assault force was now effectively leaderless, operating on training and instinct rather than coordinated tactical doctrine. 2 down, Sophia reported. Remaining hostiles are regrouping in defensive positions. They're good, but they're not thinking strategically anymore. Cameron watched the remaining operators scatter into cover positions around the ranger station, their movements becoming more erratic as they tried to avoid an enemy they couldn't see. How many left? Based on the radio chatter, 10 to 12 operators in 3 teams. They're trained for assault operations, not for dealing with a defensive sniper in prepared positions. Sophia adjusted her scope and began tracking targets as they moved through the valley below. The problem is, they're probably calling for backup. As if summoned by her words, the distant sound of helicopter rotors began to echo through the mountains. Cameron could see running lights in the distance, growing steadily brighter as the aircraft approached their position. Air support, Cameron observed. 2 helicopters, probably carrying additional assault teams and heavy weapons. Sophia's voice remained calm, but Cameron could see the tactical calculations running through her mind. This is where things get interesting. Interesting? They're about to drop another dozen operators on top of us. They're about to try. But helicopters have limitations, especially in mountainous terrain at night. Sophia reached into her equipment bag and pulled out what Cameron recognized as a military-grade surface-to-air missile system. Compact but unmistakably lethal. And I've had 3 years to prepare for exactly this contingency. Cameron stared at the weapon. Where did you get that? Let's just say that when Nighthawk was disbanded, not all of our equipment made it back to the armory. Sophia began setting up the missile system with practiced efficiency. The advantage of working in black programs is that accountability for weapons and equipment tends to be flexible. The helicopters were close enough now that Cameron could see them clearly. 2 Black Hawks flying in formation, loaded with external weapons pods and fast rope deployment systems. They were coming in fast and low, using the terrain to mask their approach until the last possible moment. They're professional, Sophia observed, tracking the lead helicopter through the missile system's targeting display. Good pilots, proper formation flying, textbook approach for a hostile insertion. But they're following doctrine, which makes them predictable. The targeting system locked onto the lead helicopter with a soft electronic beep. And predictable targets don't last long in situations like this. The missile launch was surprisingly quiet, a soft whoosh followed by a trail of fire as the projectile streaked across the night sky. The lead helicopter's pilot had perhaps 2 seconds to realize what was happening before the missile impacted, turning the aircraft into a ball of flame that illuminated the entire valley. The explosion was followed by screams over the radio as the assault teams watched their support aircraft disintegrate in mid-air. The second helicopter immediately broke formation, banking hard to avoid the same fate, but Sophia was already tracking it with her second missile. Fox 2 away, she announced, using the military brevity code for missile launch. The second helicopter lasted longer than the first, its pilot throwing the aircraft into evasive maneuvers that spoke of combat experience and desperation. But surface-to-air missiles were designed to hunt aircraft, and this one found its target with lethal precision. The second Black Hawk went down in a controlled crash, auto-rotating into a clearing about a mile from their position. 2 aircraft down, Sophia reported. Surviving crew from the second helicopter will be combat effective but stranded. Cameron could hear the panic in the radio chatter now. The assault teams were no longer dealing with a simple fugitive apprehension. They were facing someone who had just shot down 2 military helicopters and eliminated their command structure with surgical precision. This is Bravo Team Leader. We are taking effective sniper fire. Request immediate extraction. Alpha Team, fall back to Rally Point Alpha. Charlie Team is combat ineffective. We have casualties. Sophia listened to the communications for a moment, then keyed her own radio again. Attention all hostile forces. This is Ghost Fox. Your mission is over. Your command structure is eliminated, your air support is destroyed, and you are now operating without backup in terrain that I know better than you do. She paused, letting the weight of the situation sink in. You have 2 choices. You can withdraw immediately and live to fight another day, or you can continue this operation and discover why Nighthawk was considered the most effective special operations unit in the American military. The radio was silent for nearly a minute. Cameron could imagine the remaining operators weighing their options, calculating their chances of success against an enemy who had just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded their own. Finally, a voice crackled over the frequency. Ghost Fox, this is Bravo Team Leader. We're withdrawing. But this isn't over. Yes, it is, Sophia replied. Because by tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in the country is going to know that the United States government deployed military assets to hunt American veterans on American soil. They're going to know about the murders, the cover-ups, and the conspiracy that goes all the way to the top of the intelligence community. She adjusted her position to maintain visual contact with the retreating assault teams. And more importantly, they're going to know that when you tried to silence the last witnesses to your war crimes, you discovered that some ghosts don't stay buried. Cameron watched through his binoculars as the surviving operators began their withdrawal, moving with the disciplined efficiency of professionals who knew when to cut their losses. The valley that had been filled with the sound of gunfire and explosions just minutes earlier was now eerily quiet, except for the distant crackle of burning wreckage. "Is it really over?" Cameron asked. "This part is. The people who sent these teams know now that hunting Nighthawk veterans isn't going to be as easy as they thought." Sophia began breaking down her equipment, but her movements remained alert and ready. "But there are still people out there who think they can murder American citizens to protect their secrets. People who believe they're above the law. And they're about to learn that they're wrong." Sophia shouldered her pack and began moving toward the emergency extraction route she had planned. Because Ghost Fox isn't just one person, Cameron. It's an idea. The idea that some lines shouldn't be crossed, even by people who think they have unlimited authority. What happens now? Now we disappear again. But this time, we're not hiding. Sophia paused at the edge of the forest, looking back at the burning wreckage in the valley below. "We're hunting. And we're going to keep hunting until everyone responsible for these murders faces justice." Cameron followed her into the darkness, realizing that he had just witnessed something that would be talked about in intelligence circles for decades to come. The night when a supposedly helpless fugitive had turned the tables on a government assassination team and sent them running for their lives. The night when Sophia Reeves had stopped being the hunted and become the hunter. And somewhere in Washington, in offices with no windows and clearances that didn't officially exist, very powerful people were about to learn that some ghosts carried more than just secrets. Some carried consequences. 3 weeks later, Cameron Mitchell sat in a coffee shop in downtown Washington, D.C., reading the morning edition of the Washington Post with the kind of fascination that came from knowing the real story behind the headlines. The front page carried a story that had dominated the news cycle for days. Congressional hearings begin into alleged government assassination program. The subheading read, "Former CIA Deputy Director Arrested in Connection with Veteran Murders." Cameron sipped his coffee and continued reading, noting details that the general public would never fully understand. The arrest of Patricia Vance. The discovery of classified documents linking her to the Syria operation. The testimony of surviving Nighthawk members who had emerged from hiding to tell their stories to congressional investigators. What the newspaper couldn't report was how those documents had been acquired, or how surviving Nighthawk members had managed to stay alive long enough to testify. It couldn't describe the precision strikes that had eliminated 3 more assassination teams in the weeks following the Blue Ridge incident, or the mysterious packages of evidence that had appeared on the desks of investigative journalists and Congressional Oversight Committee members. The public story was about government accountability and the rule of law. The real story was about a ghost who had decided to haunt her enemies, instead of hiding from them. Cameron's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Coffee shop, corner table, 5 minutes." He looked around the crowded cafe and spotted her immediately, even though she looked nothing like the woman he had found in the Virginia wilderness 3 weeks earlier. The dark hair was now blonde and shorter. The hiking clothes had been replaced by a business suit that would have looked at home in any K Street law firm. But the eyes were the same, alert, calculating. Missing nothing, Sophia Reeves slid into the seat across from him, carrying her own cup of coffee and a newspaper folded to show the same headlines Cameron had been reading. "Interesting developments," she said quietly, her voice carrying none of the tension it had held in the mountains. "I've been following the news," Cameron replied. "Looks like your story is finally getting told, part of it. The part that can be told in congressional hearings and newspaper articles." Sophia sipped her coffee, her eyes scanning the room with the same tactical awareness she had shown in the wilderness. "The rest of it will stay classified for the next 50 years. And Patricia Vance will spend the rest of her life in federal prison, if she's lucky. If she's unlucky, she discovered that some of the people she betrayed have very long memories and very specific skill sets. Sophia's expression was neutral, but Cameron caught the implication. The other assassination teams that were eliminated, that was you, that was justice. There's a difference. Sophia set down her cup and leaned forward slightly. The people who murdered my teammates, who killed Congressman Hassan, who thought they could hunt American veterans with impunity, they needed to understand that actions have consequences. Cameron thought about the news reports he'd been following. 3 separate incidents over the past 2 weeks were suspected government assassination teams had been found dead in circumstances that suggested professional elimination. No witnesses, no evidence, no surviving members to tell their stories. How many people were involved in the conspiracy? More than we caught, fewer than we feared. Vance was the operational head, but she was taking orders from someone higher. Up the food chain. Someone who's managed to stay clean while everyone below them burns. Sophia's voice carried a note of frustration. But we've cut off the operational arm of the conspiracy. The assassination program is finished, and the people who gave the orders are discovering that being insulated by layers of bureaucracy doesn't protect you from everything. Some forms of accountability can't be avoided forever. Sophia smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested very powerful people were about to have very bad days. Cameron looked at the headlines again, thinking about the congressional hearings that were dominating news cycle. The families of the murdered veterans, they're finally getting answers. Some answers. The truth about how their loved ones died, why they were targeted, who was responsible. Sophia's expression softened slightly. It won't bring them back, but it might give their families some peace. And Hassan's family will learn that their father and husband died because he was asking the right questions about his daughter's death. That he was murdered not by foreign terrorists, but by people who were supposed to protect American interests. Sophia's voice carried the weight of someone who understood the cost of truth. It's not the closure they deserved, but it's better than the lies they were being told. Cameron thought about his own role in the events of the past 3 weeks. The search and rescue coordinator who had stumbled into a government conspiracy and helped bring it down. His official report had been carefully sanitized, describing a successful search operation that located a missing hiker who had gotten lost due to equipment failure and poor weather conditions. What about us? What happens to people who know the real story? You go back to your life, Cameron. You continue doing search and rescue work, helping people who are actually lost, saving lives that are actually in danger. Sophia reached into her briefcase and pulled out an envelope. But if you ever need help, if anyone ever asks uncomfortable questions about what happened in those mountains, you call the number in that envelope. Cameron took the envelope but didn't open it. And you? I disappear, again. But this time, it's not because I'm running from someone. Sophia stood, straightening her suit jacket with the same precision she had once used to check her tactical gear. It's because there are other injustices that need addressing, other ghosts that need to be laid to rest. You're going back to what you used to do. I'm doing what I was always meant to do. The only difference is that now I'm choosing my own missions. Sophia picked up her newspaper and briefcase. The Syria operation taught me that following orders without question can make you complicit in terrible things. But it also taught me that sometimes the only way to stop terrible things is to take action yourself. Cameron watched her prepare to leave, struck by the transformation she had undergone. 3 weeks ago, she had been a desperate fugitive hiding in the wilderness. Now she was something else entirely, a force for justice operating outside the normal channels of law and order. Will I see you again? Probably not. But you'll know when I've been somewhere. Sophia paused at his table, looking down at him, with an expression that was part gratitude, part warning. Take care of yourself, Cameron. And remember, sometimes the people who most need rescuing are the ones who look like they don't need help at all. She walked away, disappearing into the crowd of morning commuters and government workers that filled the downtown streets. Cameron watched her go, realizing that he would probably never know the full extent of what Sophia Reeves accomplished in the years to come. But sometimes, late at night, he would read news reports about corrupt officials who had suddenly decided to confess their crimes, or defense contractors who had mysteriously chosen to cooperate with federal investigations, or classified documents that had appeared on the desks of journalists at exactly the right moment to expose government wrongdoing. And he would wonder if somewhere in the shadows, a ghost was still hunting, still bringing consequences to people who thought they were above the law. The coffee shop returned to its normal rhythm of conversation and activity, but Cameron sat quietly for a long time, thinking about the woman who had taught him that sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones who looked completely ordinary, and sometimes the most heroic thing you could do was help someone who didn't need rescuing become someone who could rescue others. 6 months after their meeting in the Washington coffee shop, Cameron Mitchell was conducting a routine training exercise in the Blue Ridge Mountains when he received a call that would remind him that some stories never truly end. They just evolve into new chapters. The call came through his emergency radio from the Virginia State Police, requesting search and rescue assistance for a missing person case that had unusual circumstances. A defense contractor named Marcus Webb had disappeared from his home in Richmond 3 days earlier, leaving behind evidence of a struggle and a cryptic note that simply read, "The ghosts remember everything." Cameron knew the name. Marcus Webb had been mentioned in the congressional hearings as a mid-level CIA contractor who had provided logistical support for several black operations, including the Syria mission that had started the whole Nighthawk conspiracy. He had testified before Congress, providing limited cooperation in exchange for immunity from prosecution. But according to the news reports Cameron had been following, Webb had been receiving death threats from unknown sources who apparently didn't agree with his immunity deal. "Understood, State Police. Search and rescue team en route to coordinates," Cameron radioed back, but his mind was already working through the implications of Webb's disappearance. The search site was a remote cabin in the mountains about 40 miles from where Cameron had first found Sophia 6 months earlier. When he arrived with his team, they found a scene that looked like a textbook: abduction signs of forced entry, overturned furniture, and evidence that someone had been taken against their will. But Cameron noticed details that the state police investigators had missed. The forced entry had been staged. The overturned furniture was arranged to suggest a struggle, without showing the kind of damage that would result from an actual fight. And the note had been written on paper that showed no signs of stress or hurry, suggesting it had been composed carefully rather than scrawled in desperation. "What do you think, Mitchell?" asked Detective Sarah Martinez, the lead investigator on the case. "Professional kidnapping or something else?" Cameron studied the scene for another moment, thinking about what Sophia had taught him about reading deception and misdirection. "I think Marcus Webb staged his own disappearance." "Why would he do that?" "Because someone was hunting him and he decided to disappear before they found him." Cameron moved to the window that overlooked the valley below. "The question is, did he disappear on his own, or did he have help?" The answer came 2 hours later when Cameron's team found a trail leading away from the cabin. Not the kind of obvious path that a panicked kidnapping victim might leave, but the subtle signs of someone who knew how to move through the wilderness without being easily tracked. The trail led to an old hunting blind about 2 miles from the cabin, positioned on a hilltop that offered excellent visibility of the surrounding area. Inside the blind, Cameron found evidence that someone had been living there for several days: sleeping bag, camping supplies, and a high-powered rifle with a scope that could accurately engage targets at distances exceeding 1,000 yards. But what caught Cameron's attention was a small piece of paper tucked under a rock, visible only to someone who knew where to look. The paper contained a single line of text: "The student has become the teacher. G. F. Ghost Fox, Sophia's old call sign. Cameron pocketed the note without mentioning it to the other searchers, understanding that he had just discovered evidence of something that couldn't be included in any official report. Marcus Webb hadn't been kidnapped. He had been extracted by someone who specialized in making people disappear. The official search continued for 3 more days before being called off due to lack of evidence. Marcus Webb was declared missing under suspicious circumstances, and the case was transferred to federal investigators who would spend months following leads that led nowhere. But Cameron knew the truth. Webb had reached out to the one person who could help him disappear completely, the one person who understood what it was like to be hunted by people who operated outside the law. Sophia had taken him somewhere safe, somewhere he could live without looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. It was a pattern that Cameron began to recognize over the following months. Other figures connected to the Nighthawk conspiracy, low-level operatives who had provided testimony, contractors who had cooperated with investigators, even family members of murdered veterans who had received threats would occasionally disappear under circumstances that suggested professional extraction rather than foul play. None of these disappearances made national news. They were handled quietly by federal agencies that seemed more interested in closing cases than finding answers. But Cameron began to understand that somewhere in the shadows, Sophia Reeves was still operating, still protecting people who needed protection, still bringing consequences to those who thought they were above the law. The confirmation came almost a year after their Washington meeting, when Cameron received a package at his home address with no return label. Inside was a newspaper clipping from a small Virginia weekly, describing the mysterious death of a man named Thomas Carlyle, who had been found in his car at the bottom of a ravine, apparently the victim of a traffic accident. The article mentioned that Carlyle had been under investigation by federal authorities for his alleged role in coordinating assassination operations against military veterans, but that the investigation had been hampered by lack of evidence and jurisdictional issues. What the article didn't mention was that Thomas Carlyle had been one of the names on Jordan Palmer's list of people responsible for the Nighthawk murders. What it couldn't report was that his death hadn't been an accident, but rather the kind of precise, untraceable elimination that required extensive planning and professional execution. Attached to the newspaper clipping was a handwritten note. Some debts take longer to collect than others. Thank you for everything. Thesar. Cameron understood that he was receiving more than just an update on Sophia's activities. He was being given closure, confirmation that the conspiracy that had started with the murder of Nighthawk veterans had finally been brought to its conclusion. Every person responsible for those deaths had now faced consequences, whether through legal proceedings or more direct forms of justice. But more than that, he was being shown that the woman he had found in the Virginia wilderness had completed her transformation from victim to avenger to something else, entirely a guardian operating in the shadows, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, ensuring that the powerful faced consequences for their actions, even when the legal system failed to provide them. Cameron folded the newspaper clipping and the note, then walked to his fireplace and dropped them into the flames. Some stories were too dangerous to preserve, too sensitive to share. But as he watched the paper burn, he felt a deep satisfaction knowing that somewhere in America, a ghost was still walking, still watching, still ensuring that justice found its way to places where justice was rarely seen. The search and rescue coordinator in him knew that not everyone who was lost could be found. But the man who had spent 3 weeks in the mountains with Sophia Reeves knew something else. Sometimes the people who appeared to be lost were actually exactly where they needed to be. And sometimes the most important rescues were the ones that nobody ever heard about. That night, Cameron returned to his normal routine of monitoring emergency frequencies and coordinating search operations. But occasionally, very quietly, He would smile at news reports about corrupt officials who had suddenly decided to confess their crimes, or classified documents that had mysteriously appeared in the right hands at exactly the right time. Because he knew that somewhere in the darkness between the official channels of law and order, a ghost was still hunting, still bringing consequences to people who thought they were untouchable, still proving that some debts, no matter how well hidden or how long delayed, would eventually be collected in full. The mountains kept their secrets, but Cameron Mitchell knew the truth. Sophia Reeves had never really been lost at all. She had just been finding her way home to who she was always meant to be, a ghost with a mission, a guardian in the shadows, a reminder that in America, no one, no matter how powerful, was truly above the reach of justice. And that was exactly as it should be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.